Welcome to the workshop, everyone. Um, this is what the final product that we will be working on should look like. This is one of my effects that are on Instagram at the moment. We will not be building this whole entire effect for this workshop, just because it's going to take way too long. So we will only be focusing on the little roach over there. These assets will be available to you, and I will leave them in an assets folder for you guys to use when we get started. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Let's start by opening Spark Aero Studio. Today I will be using version 135. This is not version specific, so you can use the latest version or 2 versions prior to this. We need to start by scrolling down and finding the world object template. So let's select this template. Let's maximize the screen. Okay, so once you open the world AR template, you should find a few things that are already in here. So we have a couple of controllers here in our scene panel. We can close this up here, and you should find a couple of objects in here. Drop shadow. All of these will be replaced with the assets provided. So let's start by importing our actual 3D assets. We would need to go to our assets panel below on your bottom left and select the plus icon at the bottom. We need to go up to import, and we are going to import from computer. I have provided you guys with assets, a assets folder. In the assets folder, you guys should find the 3D models, a Spark AR files, and the textures. What we are going to import first is our 3D model. So let's open that. Okay, we have our cockroach imported, and we will need to import the textures with it. So go back to import, import from computer, back to assets, go to your textures folder, and we are going to select these 3 textures: the base color, the normal, and the occlusion roughness metallic texture. Let's open those. Okay, so we have all of our assets imported. We now need to drag our assets into our actual scene panel. So we are going to take our roach run, select it, and drag it into the scene under the delete me. Okay, so now that we have our cockroach spinning with our anchor placeholder, we can start removing a few things and renaming a few things. So first things first, we need to stop the rotation of this object. So what we need to do is select this looping anim block right here, and we need to go to its properties on the far right, and you should see a checkbox that says spinning on and off. We need to switch this off. Okay, next step is we are going to get rid of this anchor placeholder here. We do not need this, but we do need the shadow. We will keep the shadow of this anchor placeholder. So let's hit this and delete the anchor placeholder. What we also want to do is we don't want to delete the delete me box or the delete me null. We are going to just rename it as we will use it later on in the workshop. So let's rename this roach control. Okay, so now that we have everything we need set up here, we can actually start on texturing this cockroach. Okay, so at the moment the cockroach has a default material on it, an imported material that came with it imported. We are going to replace that with our own texture. So let's create a PBR texture for the cockroach. Let's go to our assets panel again, and we go to the plus again at the bottom left. Let's select that, and we are going to create a material. Let us rename this material roach matte. Okay, so if you look at your far right, the properties of your material, you should see that Spark has different kinds of shader types. If you look at the top right here, we are going to select not a standard texture or a flat texture. We are going to select the physically based texture type. Okay, so under your physically based texture type, you have different parameters. We have our diffuse parameter here under your shader properties. You have your roughness and metallic channels here, normals, emissives, environments, and here you have different tiling options. We won't go into too much detail, but we are going to put all three of our textures into this physically based material. So let's start with our diffuse texture. That's going to drive the color of the object or the color of the character, the cockroach. Let's do this by selecting the drop down over here and bring in our roach base color in. Okay, so secondly, what we want to do is we also want the occlusion and roughness map in just for the specular of the character, so the shininess and the matte parts of it. So let's go to this ORM texture slot, select the drop down list, and let's select our roach occlusion and roughness. Let's also push all of these up to 100% so that it's utilizing the full texture. Next, we want to apply our normal map to it. So let's activate this checkbox here, and then we need to select the drop down and put our normal in. This will affect the smoothness and the details of the actual cockroach. Okay, so physically based materials work a lot better with the environment channel so that it can pick up a certain kind of reflection for your ORM. So we are also going to activate our environment texture. Okay, so in order to get our environment texture, we need to add it to our assets panel. So we're going to go back to our add button, but this time we need a texture, and we are going to look for a environment texture. The AR library should pop up. Here you can find multiple objects for your effects. You can find textures, shaders, all sorts of patches, etc. But we are going to only use the environment texture. So let's select the environment textures. And let's select our gray pier. Import. Done. Okay. So once that's been imported, it should show up here. And what we are going to do is select the drop-down list for your environment and select the gray pier. Okay, now that our material is actually set up, let's apply it to our cockroach. So let's select our character and let's go to its properties on the right hand side, and let's replace its default texture with our roach material texture. Boom. There we go. Okay, so that's looking kind of good. The next step we need to do is to actually change our diffuse texture and the way it encodes the color for this object. So we need to change this roach base color to, instead of linear, to RGB. And the color should look a lot richer. Okay, so now that we have our object ready to go, we are going to need to apply animation to this object. As you can see here, we already have an animation attached to our 3D object. What we need to do is create a animation playback controller to drive the animation of the cockroach. So what we need to do is we need to go to our assets panel again, and we are going to create a animation playback controller. So under playback controllers, you should find your animation playback controller. Select that. Once you've selected it, you should be able to scroll down your assets and it should be created, and it should have a its base name would be animation playback controller 0. What we want to do is we actually want to change that and rename that to roach animation. Okay, once we have our roach animation playback controller, we need to go to its properties and actually load the animation, which is item, into the animation clip. So in its properties, we will select a drop down and select from none to item. Okay, so that's your animation loaded into your playback controller. We need to take this playback controller and we need to apply it to our actual object, which is our roach run. Select your roach run, and once it's highlighted, you should be able to see its properties on the far right. You should see that there are no controllers selected for this object yet. So we want to load in our roach animation into this. So select the drop down and select roach animation. As soon as you select that, the roach should be running in one place. Okay, so now that we have our cockroach running in one place, we need to now create the forward motion of the cockroach. We are going to use the patch editor to drive the rotation of this cockroach, so that we can just save space on animation in general. So what we need to do for that is we actually need to create a rotation patch for our character. So what we need to do is under our roach controller, if you guys select your roach controller, we are going to create a rotation patch here. Okay, so now that we have our rotation patch created, let us actually move our character off center just a bit. Okay, so why am I doing that? We need our cockroach to actually run around our roach controller. So before we even start driving the animation for the patch of this controller, we actually need to take our roach character off center. So we're gonna move the cockroach and the roach run off center so he can run around the center point. While we're here, let's also just scale our cockroach down a bit, just so it's not so big, and this will just move it a bit in screen so we can see where he is. Okay, so in order to move this cockroach, we are going to need a loop animation. So right click in the middle of your patch editor and we will type in loop, select our loop animation. This loop animation is responsible for how long how long your actual animation will be looped. So there's just a few options here. You can either mirror and yeah. Okay, so what we need to do next is we need to create certain patches that are going to drive the movement of this character. So the first thing we need to do is right click in your patch editor, and we need a loop animation. This will mainly be responsible for looping the animation and how long the animation takes or how long it takes to loop the animation. Okay, next we need a transition. This will be responsible for the actual movement of the object on the X, the Y, and the Z. So we are going to connect these. So I'm going to connect the progress to the progress of the transition, and then I need to connect the value to the 3D rotation of the roach controller. We need to set everything to 0 for now, and all we need to do is change the Y to do a full circle, which is 360 degrees. So you should see your cockroach running really fast, and to change that we need to alter the duration of the loop animation. So we will set that to around 10 seconds. Okay, that is still too slow. Let's set it to about 5 seconds. Okay. So this is the base. Okay, so once we have the base effect going, this is looking pretty good. I like to just do a few little small tweaks just to get the effect looking good, especially just with the shadow, also with the speed of the animation, since we have so much control. Yeah, I just like to polish the effect just a little bit. So let me just show you guys a little bit about the shadow, especially before we close the workshop up, just because the shadow will also play a big role in how realistic your effect actually looks. So let's look into just the shadow here. If you guys go into your assets panel, you should find your drop shadow matte here. If you look at its properties here, we can just mainly mess with the opacity, so how dark it is. As you can see, it's pretty light, so let's just pause the effect here. Let's select this roach, the shadow here, scale it up a bit, make it kind of match the body. Let's go back to its material and drop it just a little bit. See, what you can also do is, if you want a softer shadow, what we can do is, if we select this texture here, it should take us directly to the SDF section here that can actually make your shadows softer. And with softer shadows, you know, it can look a lot more realistic. Now let's up the opacity a bit. Great. That actually looks really good. So you guys can make your own tweaks in the project if you want. I will be supplying the spider as well, so you guys can actually finish the entire effect. And yeah, I hope you guys learned something from this workshop, and I can't wait to see your guys' effects.